What's going on, summoners? Welcome back to the channel, and like always, we're here to keep you updated on the latest news. My name is Crumbs and I'll be your host for this short video as we talk about what we've learned about Taliyah's upcoming rework. In case you weren't aware, she's due for a mid-scope update that's currently planned to hit the live servers on patch 12.9. She should also be available on the PBE if you're interested in giving her a try. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content like this, and let's get started. To begin the video, let's talk about what these changes do. The biggest reasons these changes were needed were for her problematic burst damage and roaming. Both of these are taking a hit when her mid-scope update goes live, but she is receiving several adjustments to compensate and also help find a unique identity for her on the roster. A more boring but is still essential change to note is that her base stats are receiving adjustments. Her base mana is going up, but her base mana regeneration will be slightly reduced. Additionally, Taliyah will end up a bit squishier than before, with less base armor and starting health. In spite of this, I'm actually thinking we might see tankier versions of Taliyah coming up in the near future. I'll explain why right after I give you the rundown of her ability changes. The first change is for her passive. This is a simple change to address her early roaming power. Early on in the game, she'll receive much less bonus movement speed, but end up gaining more in later stages. She'll also hit the movement speed bonus cap at level 15 rather than 18. Honestly, all of her abilities are receiving massive reworks, but I'd say her Q might be the most significant. The reason for this is that her worked ground takes on an entirely new role moving forward. On the live server, worked ground allows her to shoot a single rock at virtually no cost. However, that little pebble is turning into a giant boulder moving forward. Rather than losing power after working the space around her, Taliyah will play more like a setup character. She wants to fight in the same area, forcing opponents to either respect the ground she's worked or take a risk and fight her on the advantageous terrain she's chosen. Casting Q on worked ground launches a powerful boulder that will deal double damage on its primary target and also slow enemies caught in a generous AOE splash. That said, her normal Q is facing some damage nerfs, but in return will receive AOE damage, a slightly shorter cooldown, and a slightly lower mana cost at max rank. This is why I potentially believe Taliyah may take on a battle mage role. Depending on the final numbers, it might be worth running Conqueror, and with less burst damage, it's inevitable that her item build will change as well. For the sake of optimal DPS, she'll need longer fights regardless of how she builds, since the boulders from worked ground will certainly be significant. On the side, her Q's damage to jungle monsters will be adjusted. While multiple rocks thrown at jungle monsters will deal less damage than before, the spell includes a 150% damage modifier, meaning that the new boulder will deal sizable damage to jungle monsters. Finally, she'll be able to continue casting her Q after entering stasis. Sounds like it'll be really stylish and we'll definitely see a lot of takedowns with this upcoming new tech. By the way, once this rework goes live, if you want to quickly learn Taliyah, make sure to contact a coach over at ProGuides.com. They're not only great coaches, but great players too, so they're certainly going to learn as much as they can about her as soon as possible. Let them pass some of that knowledge down to you and save you some time. Although that was the biggest change, we still have other important ones to cover. Believe it or not, Taliyah's W will not deal any damage after her update. Instead, the ability will be reworked into a pure utility tool. To further stress its use as a piece of utility, it'll have its cooldown and mana cost reduced and also be easier to land. The mana cost will tentatively scale to 0 at max rank. In regards to why it's easier to land, that's because the delay before the knockback will be shorter and the AOE radius increased slightly. It's a huge change and also heavily contributes to lowering Taliyah's burst damage. Next, her E is also up for some buffs. While its damage is going up, it will not compensate for the damage loss from her W changes. That said, her E's mines will not detonate on their own at the end of their duration. Instead, you will need to land a knockback to trigger them. Aside from some higher damage output, her E is receiving a massive buff to its utilities. You'll love this. Enemies that dash through the mines will be stunned for 1 second. Similarly to Poppy's W, Taliyah's E will serve as a way to counter mobile enemies. A final buff is that the layout of the mines will be changed. The number of tiles shot out will remain the same, but the width and length will be swapped. In other words, it'll shoot less tiles widthwise but more lengthwise, effectively increasing the range of the ability. What's objectively a nerf to the ability is that it'll have a longer cooldown at max rank. Damage and cooldowns aside, the ability will also cast its first row of mines instantly, but have a slightly increased delay between each row. This change makes it much more effective as a reactive defensive option. If you're using it in response to someone's dash, especially if they're dashing towards you, this is a huge buff, theoretically at least. It's going to depend a lot on your ping, unfortunately. Finally, Taliyah's ultimate is up for a nice buff as well. Although its early cast range is going down, the range is going up later, and damage will no longer knock her off of it. Her rework will also highlight a dash off of her wall. Rather than jumping off perpendicularly to her wall, Taliyah will now be able to dash towards any target direction, up to a maximum range. This means it'll also be much easier to dash through walls. At the end of the day, Taliyah will lose burst damage and early roaming power. However, her utility and rework Q will make her a powerful teammate to have in longer teamfights. Even in chaotic ones, she'll be able to control much more space now that enemies have to consider that they'll be stunned after dashing through her mines. If not a tankier battle mage build, Taliyah players will definitely want to focus heavily on purchasing items that provide ability haste to take advantage of her W and E changes. That concludes our first impressions of the Taliyah mid-scope update. Let me know what you think about them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, have a great day.